Thank you for coming to our workshop on avoiding sentence fragments and creating a cohesive sentence. If you'd like a copy of the slides used in this video, you can email me, Professor Scanlon, at scanlon1@kenyon.edu. To address fixing sentence fragments, first you have to know what they are. So sentence fragments are incomplete sentences. They're incomplete because they lack one of three things. They either lack subjects or the noun doing the action. So for example, ran fast. We don't know who ran fast because we have no subject, so it's a sentence fragment. Another thing that they might lack is predicates or main verbs. For example, the woman with the long hair. What about the woman with the long hair? We don't have a predicate, so we don't know. Lastly, they may be a dependent clause lacking an independent clause. So for example, when in Rome. What do we do when we're in Rome, or what do we need to know about when in Rome? We're missing another clause, so we don't know. These are all incomplete sentences. So there are a couple different ways we can recognize sentence fragments. The first is to look for a verb or action word. Every sentence must have a main verb. If there isn't a verb, it's a fragment. So for example, the quotation about writing. This is a fragment because we don't know what we need to know about this quotation. To fix, we need to explain with a verb. The quotation about writing shows us to not be afraid to make mistakes. Now we have a verb connecting two ideas and we know what we should learn about them. Another way we can recognize sentence fragments is by looking for a subject. A subject is usually a noun or noun phrase identifying a person, place, thing, or idea. Every sentence must have a main subject. If there isn't a main subject, it's a fragment. So for example, shows us not to be afraid to make mistakes. What is showing us this? We need a subject that explains it. So we add one. The quotation about writing shows us not to be afraid to make mistakes. The noun phrase, the quotation about writing, bolded here, lets us know what our subject is. Another way we can recognize sentence fragments is by looking for subordinating conjunctions, such as when, while, because, or relative pronouns, such as who, which, or that. Subordinating conjunctions are used to construct dependent adverbial clauses, so that lets us know we have a dependent clause, we need an independent clause. And relative pronouns are used to construct dependent adjectival clauses. Again, we have a dependent clause, so we're going to need an independent clause if we want a complete sentence. If you suspect a passage is a fragment, the presence of these conjunctions, like when, while, and because, or these pronouns, like who, which, and that, will likely prove it is, if there is no independent clause. So, how do we recognize sentence fragments when it's a subordinating conjunction? Let's look at an example. Our example is, while not being afraid of writing is practical. We don't know what the sentence is connected to. We don't know what the while is telling us. So we can either remove it, not being afraid of writing is practical, or we can add another independent clause. While not being afraid of writing is practical, we still need to get started early and not wait until the last minute. We know this is an independent clause because it can stand on its own without the dependent clause while not being afraid of writing is practical. It can read, we still need to get started early and not wait until the last minute, and make complete sentence on its own as a sentence. We recognize sentence fragments with relative pronouns, like in this example, which makes sense. What is this sentence connected to? We don't know what makes sense, so we need to make the connection explicit. She recommended starting my paper before finals week, which makes sense. Now we know that starting the paper early makes sense. So how do we fix them? When it's a dependent clause, we can convert the dependent clause to an independent clause by eliminating subordinating conjunctions or substituting the antecedent or personal pronoun for the relative pronoun. So for example, even though the president attended the meeting, we can just take out even though and have the president attended the meeting. The full sentence makes sense. Or we can add a little bit more information in with the personal pronoun he. Even though the president attended the meeting, he did not seem to pay attention. If the fragment is a noun phrase and has no main verb, or a verbal phrase, verbs and associated words are not functioning as a main verb, we need to restore the subject or join the phrase to an independent clause. So for example, if our fragment is crossing out the word very, We can revise it with the subject, Bob Smith crossed out the word very, or we can revise it by making it part of a dependent clause attached to an independent clause. Crossing out the word very, Bob Smith edited the magazine article rigorously. If it is a dependent clause, we can revise infinitive phrases if they're functioning as nouns. So, for example, to delete the word very can become Johnson prefers to delete the word very when copy editing. We're now rewriting as an independent clause by linking it to a subject and a predicate or verb, pardon. We can also revise prepositional phrases that are functioning as modifiers by joining the prepositional phrase to an independent clause, usually in the sentence before or after. Prepositional phrases are those phrases which offer a location, such as during or under or above. In this case, it's with its emphasis on informal education. To revise it, we could write, with its emphasis on informal communication, email is today's communication media of choice. If you have an appositive phrase, you can also fix by rewriting as a complete sentence or inserting into another independent clause, modifying the proper noun. So if our fragment is a tendency to drive first and think late about the environment later, our complete sentence can be, Americans have a tendency to drive first and think about the environment later. If you would like more support, you can visit our tutors online in the second floor of Chalmers Library. To make an appointment, you can go to owl.kenyon.edu, or you can stop by and see one of our tutors and they'll help you out. Thank you so much for listening.